We laugh. We cry. We learn. But really, what doesn't kill you makes you better at managing clients and everyone. I'm Morgan Friedman, and this is Client Horror Stories. Hey everyone, welcome back to the latest episode of Client Horror Stories. I'm excited to have with me Brandon Kirkpatrick. Did I pronounce it in the most redneck way possible?
That's it. You got it.
I was instructed viewers to pronounce it in a redneck way. Now that I've got your name down, Pat, let's jump right into your story. I have my cup of coffee in hand.
Same.
Perfect.
It's full. You can see it. It's full. We're going to be here in a while.
We will be here.
So a little bit of backstory here. I joined a tech startup in 2020, and we were doing some really cool things. We were building autonomous drones. So for all the people not in the autonomous drone world, because it's a pretty small group of people, the product that we had built, or were building at the time, was drone sits in a box. Somebody needs a drone on site. They push a button on their computer screen or phone or whatever, and drone goes to a location, right? And it starts looking around, and this is really for security purposes, right? And so we built this thing fully functional. We flew it literally from all over the world, even though we were here, other people were flying it. We had pilots, safety pilots. But in that process, we got this is a chance encounter on a motorcycle ride with a potential client. So there was this meeting that happened, right? And what do you do?
A meeting happened on a motorcycle ride.
On a motorcycle ride, yes. And so let's call her Mary. Mary was on the motorcycle ride with somebody at our company, our founder, and just kind of happened to start talking, right? And come to find out, they kind of needed what we were doing. They wanted it. And let's just call them the FBI. It's not the FBI, just for, simplicity's sake. Let's just call them the FBI.
A three-letter agency.
A three-letter agency.
I want to pause and make the observation that when you deal with three-letter agencies or potential three-letter agencies, I kind of believe coincidences don't exist. Like the start on day one of intelligence operations, like day one of training, they teach you that nothing happens by chance. That hot woman that comes to talk to you in the bar, maybe it's because you're that sexy and that cute that the beautiful will want to pick you up. Or maybe there's a reason why someone is having this hot woman come over and get know you. So to me, three-letter agency having a chance encounter on a motorcycle ride, it asks me, what is happening here? And I don't know what's going to happen, but it's definitely going in an interesting direction.
I don't know. I don't control those things. I understand. But we didn't know this person before, right? And it's not like, it's the FBI. It's not like it's the CIA, right? And so, or are they? Who knows? So one of the things that we started talking about was oh, well, what do you do, right? What does your system do? They're asking us. And so we start these conversations, right? And so if you know anything about startup life or the drone industry itself, American-made drones are not cheap. And they're especially not cheap when you put them in something else and make them fully autonomous, right? So you can buy a cheap Chinese drone, a good quality industrial drone, for about $15,000 at the time. American-made drones by themselves were somewhere in the range of 20 to 25, unless you went with a different version and it was a lot more expensive. Maybe it's $100K. And so these are very expensive things. So when you put them inside, they get very expensive. And so, you know, we start this conversation really more as oh, that's interesting. Let's talk to these folks. They seem to need what we have. They seem to want it. They have some real use cases that would save them money, which, if you know anything about the federal government, they love to save money, right? It would keep them from doing some other activities that they didn't have to do, because you can trade out versus a helicopter, you know, things like that if you're doing inspections and that type of thing. And so we get connected with this woman, and this thing drags on for 2 years.
2 years?
2 full years. Right. And so we went into it, I don't want to say blind, because the people that we've worked with have dealt with government types of bureaucracies and purchasing, you know, and how long that takes, and budget cycles, and like, it's very, very complicated. And so we anticipated all of those things, right? We didn't go into it thinking like, oh, this will be easy. We'll close it, you know, in 3 months and we'll move on down the road. We knew it was going to be kind of a long, drawn out process, but the horror came in from the side that there were things that we didn't know. There were things that we just like, we got blindsided with. It wasn't until 2 years in that we got blindsided by this stuff.
So this is an interesting point. Something I try to do in every episode is to have a new lesson. And we've had like 70 episodes, and incredibly, there's always a new lesson. But I feel like already one interesting point has come out, like that notion of setting a time limit before giving up, like knowing nothing about the surprises at the door, just knowing 2 years. It's like if you're waiting 2 years for a client to happen, it's never going to happen. Like they're playing with you.
I don't think that's 100% true. I think.
Feel free to disagree with me. Bring out the New Yorker and you say, Morgan, you're wrong. Let me tell you.
Well, I'm from Texas. I'm going to be very nice and polite. At least I should be, right? No, I don't think that's entirely true. I don't think they were playing with us. 100%. They were real. But there's a difference. There's a difference in it being real and having to fit it into a budget. And there are other people that make this decision.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute. But first, let's just talk about time limits, because I think I've never addressed it before, and I actually think it's a really interesting point. So I often talk about managing clients and dealing with them through the metaphor of dating. Like, just how would you treat it?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, they're just different types of relationships. You need to be excited. You need to have good communication. You know, you need to align your expectations. You want to get married or have a one-night stand. It's just different types of relationships. And the relationship metaphor I would give here is, if a girl is dating a guy, or any gender, it's 2024, anything goes, that two humans are dating, and one of them wants to get married and is like, where's the ring? Where's the ring? And the other one says, oh yeah, the ring is coming in a month. And 2 years go by. Like, I think the right strategy for the girl is to set a time limit. I'll tell him I want a ring and expect to get married within a year. And if he doesn't do it within a year, bam, I'm out of here. I think enforced time limits are very powerful.
I think so. But I think there's also a line there, right? So I think when you're walking in, especially with government, 2 years isn't crazy. It's not that crazy. I mean, when you think of the way budgets are set, especially depending on when you start that relationship, you may hit the end of their budget cycle immediately, or you may be right in the middle of it. And so setting that timeline is important, but saying that everybody has to fit a single specific timeline, I don't think that exists, right? And so typically for government, you're going to see about, usually people set their budgets around September, August, usually it's in the summer, and then they go into effect in the fall. And so a lot of times that's the case for local governments. It depends on location and stuff. But if you hit it at the wrong time, now you're doing kind of a lead-in discussion into their budget cycle. And if you cross that line, like it didn't get allocated, now you're pushed back a year almost automatically because they couldn't fit it in. I mean, we've dealt with this in a couple of cases. And so aside from, this timeline lesson, selling to government takes longer, just as a general rule. And so it gets really complicated. I agree. Your timelines make sense, but I think be aware of who you're talking to and when you're talking to them. That's really important.
I'm sold. I'm convinced that if your budget is set once a year and you happen to miss that deadline, you start talking 4 months before it's set, and that's just not enough time for them to do it. Guess what? You add 12 months to it. So,
exactly.
So I said, okay, I understood. So I could see how it could become a year and a half conclusion. Some people just have much more patience than I have.
If you don't have much patience, do not sell to government.
Yeah, let's date for 40 years. Maybe after 40 years we'll get married. We'll know
maybe after 4 years. Yeah. Maybe we'll get out of debt after. Oh nope, there's more debt.
Exactly. Okay. So this is an interesting tangent on timing. So 2 years now, before this tangent, you were about to say that a whole bunch of revelations came out about 2 years in.
Right, about 2 years in. So, we're through those 2 years, we're doing R&D, right? We hadn't made sales to anybody. We're still building the product, and we're listening to them as kind of an anchor customer to say, hey, if we can land y'all, we can make this go, really big because you're going to support us for a long time. That's the type of relationship you want to build, especially with somebody like that, especially with Mary at the FBI. And so we're doing R&D, we're taking their feedback in, right? And so for the first about year and a half, it was 3 people. It was Mary, who was really what we thought was the decider, the person that kind of making the call and driving forward this initiative on their side. And then a couple of alternate people who were a little more technical, who could evaluate a little bit more. And so we're doing R&D through this process, right? But the sales process for a physical product, especially government related, is a little bit different than a software product, right? And so we're trying to do demos. If you know anything about a hardware demo that flies, that is not completely weatherproof, it gets a little wild when you're trying to plan a demo for more than one person. You can't just do it ad hoc, like, oh, hey, the weather's good today. Let's fly today. You should just hop on and see this thing. And so you're dealing with all of these like, oh man, the wind's above 40 miles an hour today. We can't fly because the FAA says we can't fly. There are some really specific laws that are in place, or the manufacturer says you can't fly in this type of conditions. And so we're dealing with all of these things. And so that just naturally happens. But we're scheduling these demos. They're very complicated, and we're trying to make it simple for them. And so we're being easy to work with because you want to be a person who people feel like it's easy to buy from you, right? And then about really a year and a half in, we get introduced to a whole different group of people, right? And so for a year and a half, we were thinking like, oh, she's driving this forward on her side, and we've got kind of this leader that is being really an advocate for what she wants out of her program. And then we get introduced to new people. And those new people have completely different skill sets, completely different thoughts. and they approach things from a different perspective. Now, mind you, well, I'll say as kind of a tangent, government's really, really siloed, right? So if you've ever heard of the term, silos in business, they are extremely siloed. And it gets worse the larger you are, right? Because you may not even know that there are 10 other people that have to sign off on this. And so you may not even know of them or know their name. I mean, like, it gets really complicated when you sell to that level of an organization versus a small, medium business. One person going to make a decision. They're going to be responsible for all of it. And kind of the buck stops there versus big organizations, very bureaucratic. There's 10 people that actually need to sign off on this. And then it has to be approved and then go through the budget process. So it gets really complicated. So we were introduced to these people, right? And so at that point, they start asking technical questions, which are really good questions.
Before we get into the security level questions and what happens in the soap opera, when you are introduced to these people, were you told like they're higher level, they're lower level,
No.
or like
no. Okay. They weren't. That's the problem. They weren't higher or lower. They were the same, but in a different area.
It's just like, okay, now the security team needs to do some due diligence.
Yes. Yeah.
Something like
that. And so it's like, oh, well, I wish we'd have known about this, a year and a half ago, so we could have started that conversation with them. And so I think a useful tangent here is multi-threading. If you go through much sales training, you'll hear about this idea of multi-threading and how to get multiple people involved. And I think a big takeaway for me is that we relied on the information that she gave us. And I just want to be very clear. I don't hate Mary. I don't hate her at all. I think there were some areas that she didn't really understand technically, but multi-threading, well, let me just finish this thought. I think multi-threading, the idea that you go into it looking for those people rather than just sitting back waiting to hear from them when they happen, right? So you go into it saying like, who else has to make this decision? Here's how this product works, or if it's a service or whatever. Who else should be involved in this? Because we want to get them involved from the very beginning, so they go along this journey with us. I think it's really, really powerful.
Okay, so this is interesting. I feel like you're implying what happened, but you haven't yet said it. What you're getting at is, with your talking about your anger, oh, I don't hate Mary. It sounds like you thought she had the authority to say yes when really she either didn't have the authority or she needed like these 10 other groups to give their sign off as well.
She had the authority for her budget, but she did not have the technical authority to sign off from a security perspective. That was a different team, right? And so those are different things. There's different groups of people that make those decisions that this is technically sound and the federal government won't be, hacked and stuff like that. Like we want these people working for us, right? We want these people working for the FBI that say, hey, hold on a second. Before you buy that thing, are we going to get hacked? Is there something here? Let's go through a review. You want those people there. So in no way do I hate that they got involved. But at the same time, like, man, I wish I'd known these people existed a year and a half ago, and so it's frustrating. It is frustrating.
Okay, this is interesting. So you want to get something done too quick. Maybe it's useful to ask this question in a positive and negative way. Who has the authority to say yes, and who has the authority to say no? Yeah. And there's different people because you need to know, okay, here's the big CEO. He's actually really the one that decides what happened. But then you also need to know, but he can be blocked by the board of directors, the opposite team. Boom, boom, boom. what's also interesting about this framing, who has the authority to say yes and who has the authority to say no, is it feels like this is useful not only in a sort of sales context where you're talking about getting this big client for the drones, but also in just managing clients. You have a client and you want to do some initiative for them. You're like, oh, my client's website is ugly. Let's make them a new website. So you need to know who is the person that can say yes, but also who are all the people that can block it.
Oh yeah, yeah, because there are certain groups of people that can block a lot of things, even though they're not at the same level, right? They may not even be, and we never knew whether they were higher or lower. I think they were kind of similar, to be honest with you. That gets really complicated in government bureaucracies. But you really, really want to know the client really well and know where all of those
but it's interesting.
Are.
But it's actually interesting because you can look at this on like an easy way to think about this concept is you're an individual, you just want to be hired for a normal 9 to 5 employee job. There's the person that says yes. The manager of this department is the person that can say yes. So he's the one that's who to hire. At the same time, the HR department will say, like, does he have the papers in order? Does he have does he satisfy the criteria? Does he have whatever? Does he have a criminal record? University where like HR has the ability to say no, even though the boss has the ability to say yes.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that exists for almost every single client, right? Like those, unless you're selling to like a single person. I mean, even to the point that if you go out to dinner with a single person business, the wife can say no, right? I just don't feel good about this person. And so knowing where those are is super helpful. This is why I think it makes a ton of sense why government tends to buy from the same people over and over, because they just know this process and they don't waste their time because they know who to talk to. They know they almost live inside of that ecosystem where they know who to go talk to in addition to this one person, and they understand kind of those steps not to take and then the steps to take. That it almost makes it easier for people who are purchasing from a government perspective to purchase.
Yeah, I like that. And what's interesting is in working with smaller companies, when it's a company of 15 people, everyone, and it's just the same people. And so, but as it gets bigger, these become different departments, people don't know personally. So it's useful to think about who's going to say yes and who's going to say no. And to make it even more complex, it's not only by title, it's also by personality type. Like sometimes you're just powerful people in an organization, an important member of the board of directors, a big investor that will just have these really strong preferences. Like, no, don't do this.
And it gets worse, right? Because it could be something like a congressman that really wants that thing to go through that will say, hey, look, we set your salary and we approve your budgets. You're going to go with this, with this vendor over that vendor. Like, to think that doesn't happen is somewhat jaded, right? So I think that 100%, you're totally right. I would also say that after 2020, that's gotten even more complicated because they are different departments, but they may no longer be at the same place, right? Before 2020, government bureaucracies, they had big buildings. A lot of them work from, the same place. Now, multi-site locations can be a bit different, but, you may have technical folks all in one building. But now it's like those people are scattered everywhere. So you may not just be dealing with people in one location. You may be dealing with people that are scattered throughout the country or even the world for that matter. And so even finding those times to meet and talk, they just become more complicated. And it's not impossible, right? But any little thing like this just makes it more difficult.
Okay. Super interesting. Great tangent. So now what happens? So basically, it turns out Mary, without telling you, needed to get these other departments to sign off. So the other department started asking security questions, and that's where we got on the tangent. Now what happens next?
So they sent us a form. That's what they said. They said, we really need you to fill this form out. And it was detailed. It was complicated. But we went through it, right? And it probably took a week to turn that around for them. But a week isn't a small amount of time from a sales perspective. And so we're getting technical people involved. We're answering questions. We're digging into really the architecture of how the system was built. And so we answer these questions. We send it all back and nothing, right? Like, have you gotten it? Have you read it? Like, can we talk about this? Like, what do you have questions? Like, in typical kind of government fashion, just like very quiet for extended periods of time.
Was this form like an ad hoc form of questionnaire for you, or was it some like off the shelf? Oh, you have to do,
yes, version
297B.
Yes, yeah, it's like this thing has existed since 1992, right? And Mary just didn't know about it because she's never purchased something like this before. She's responsible for X, and now they're getting more technologically advanced, and this other thing now applies, and it's like, oh shoot, well, here's another 2-month setback. So we fill this form out, pretty straightforward. We answer their questions, we send it back in, right? And we built everything in the cloud, in AWS, which is a big government vendor. And so we answer their questions. We try to get on a call like, hey, talk to us. Let us know what you think. And really what came out of that call was, I think there were, gosh, that was an expensive meeting. Just as a side tangent, whenever I get into a meeting, I try to figure out how much it costs per hour to sit there for all the people's salaries. Like, to me, it's kind of like a game of like, man, this is an expensive meeting, or, hey, this is a pretty cheap meeting. There's 2 people here. Our time is not worth very much, or maybe it's worth a lot. But when you start getting like 10, 15 people on a call, man, it just racks up, fixed costs. And so we finally get on a call. There's about 10 people. There's a, there's a drone kind of specialist that's involved that understands drones. There's also really like an architecture, infrastructure type of person. And they start kind of rapid fire questioning, and we're answering, right? We know how our system is built. We know what we've done up to this point. They ask us a very specific question. Hey, is this so it's software, right? It's hardware and software. Is this written by software developers outside the US? Like, yeah, of course. Like, we were very clear about that from day one with Mary, right? We've got developers in India. They were literally part of our team. They weren't some random company that we had hired. Like, they were part of the team. They were employees. And that's not going to work. What do you mean that's not going to work? Like, what are your security parameters around foreign developers? They wouldn't answer the question. So in government security world, they prefer US-based only software developers because all the security reasons. Are they going to try to hack the system? Are they going to try to find a way in? And so this has all been developed by folks in India. I've met them in person. They're friends of mine. They're good people, but the federal government doesn't know that. The FBI doesn't know that. And so they have to make sure that, I don't know these people. And so we said, well, what are our options? Like, do we, fire them all? And do we have to just hire US developers to go through every line of code to make sure there's no thing in here that's going to attack anything? Like, and I knew there wouldn't be, right? The whole team knew that.
Right.
But they wouldn't answer the question. And really at the end of the day, what they came back with was, if you don't know how to do this, and if you already don't know the answers to these questions, we don't really want to work with you. Like, we can get the answers to the question. In startup world, I feel like there are many answers to questions you don't know. you're trying to find those answers as you go, as you work along, and to hear like, well, if you already don't know the answer,
but not in government world,
right? If you already don't know the answer, we're not going to tell you the question. That's actually what was said, right? And so up to this point, I think we'd probably spent $4 or $5 million, $4 or $5 million over this time, a ton of money. I think if I had to boil down like how much money they were responsible for almost wasting, I would say it was probably in the area of 1 to 2 just for them, of time that we spent not just working with them, but dragging things out a little bit, right? Everything drug out a little bit further, and so it is probably one of the best horror stories that I have. Hopefully it's the best I have, right? but also such a good lesson. Such a good lesson.
Losing $5 or $6 million is, or wasting, is big enough to be a powerful. I'm moved by this question that they asked you. If you don't already know the answer, we're not going to even tell you what the question is. And I feel like this is how a lot of the darker underbelly of civilization works. That they,
for sure.
Like there's this like basically civilization is just everyone's playing a game and they like won't even tell you the game, and like you either you figure out the game through osmosis, or you're an NPC who is not playing the game. So that question is really a way of saying, we thought you were a player in the game, but you're really just an NPC who wants to play the game. Sorry, back to being an NPC.
So we were kind of left with, after that, we were left with, well, what are our options? Our options are to basically go out, find and hire a very expensive technical architect from a security perspective to kind of audit the system and then know the answers to these questions that we don't even have, and then hire an entirely U.S. software team to basically not completely rebuild, but to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. Meanwhile, we'd already pitched a price, right, for these systems and how this would. So through all of the normal, like, okay, here's the price, here's what we can do, here's how we can work with that. Once they lock that in, which to me, like, if it's not locked in, it's not locked in. We can always change things. If you change things, I get to change things. That's just kind of how I don't assume that I never get to change anything. But they'd already locked us into a price that we were going to honor, right, until they bring all this other stuff up. Well, now, if you have to go out and hire those people to do all those things, the price is going to change, because software is driven by really two things: how much software developers cost and how many of them it takes and how large you can scale it. And so it's like US-based resources are a lot more expensive. Probably at that time, it was probably somewhere around 3 to 4x what foreign developers were. And, were they going to pay 3 to 4x the price? Like, that was tough. And so all of that kind of boiled down to us making the decision. And we told them, I told them point blank, I said, look, if you're not willing to commit to a price and stick it through, then we're not going to spend all this money doing this thing for you, so we get to go back through this budget process again. If you're not willing to sign some form of commitment where, when we complete these things and we buy this, we not buy this person, we pay for this person, and they do all these things, and they know the answers to your vague questions, then we're not going to make that investment. We're not going to invest another $250,000, $500,000 if you're not even willing to commit to this? And so we basically walked away after 2 years, and really that next week, the people who were really concerned about security were flying an illegal Chinese-made drone, and they posted it on like their Facebook. And so we went through this really long process.
Did they post the official?
They posted on official social media of we've got this one team of people who is really concerned about security and making sure that there are no, foreign developers. And then this other group of people that's like, I'm going to fly this Chinese drone that's banned. I don't care. And it's like, come on, man. Come on.
So, question. How come you think these same guys were sticklers with you, but yet they broke the law for
completely
others?
different group. Completely different group of people. The pilots flying these drones were not the same people that were digging into our software. Right? It's just a completely different group of people, and just I think this is usually what happens in large businesses. Complete oversight by somebody, right? Of they shouldn't be flying that. There's no way they should be flying that there. But this one group of people that's really kind of back in infrastructure type of security people, it's not the same people making those decisions about what drones to fly.
I think that another lesson in there is just to emphasize the randomness of which people happen to be on the team that you're assigned to. Like, there are 20 people on that security team, and you happen to be assigned these 3 who happen to be like the assholes, while the different 3 just like happen to be more lenient, which shows what matters is less being a sticker for the rules and more who is the fallible human being that's actually implementing the policies.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, because the policy can say whatever it is, but if the person making the decision allows it, like, or if they turn away, or they don't care about it, or they don't read it and they don't know it, like, you can do whatever you want.
Exactly. Wow. 2 years and $5 million gone. Now we can wind back, and I'm remembering your comment from 15 minutes ago when you gave me the hint of what was to come, and when you said, I don't hate Mary.
Like, I don't. I really don't. She was a very sweet person.
You're nicer than me. As sweet as she is, wasting 2 years of my life and $5 million. I'll say it differently. The old saying, don't attribute to maliciousness what you could attribute to stupidity. Like, I'm not sure I believe that. There's a fine line. Like, at what point is being so naive indistinguishable in any way from being malicious? Said differently, I agree with that. Said differently, if I were really malicious, I would want everyone to think I'm a good guy, but just really naive and simple and stupid.
Yeah, I think that's really tough to make that decision. And the way I play that is that, kind of fool me once, like, okay, you got me. But more than once, then it's intentional, right? Yes. And so on the first go round, I reserve the right to say, like, okay, I'm just going to chalk that one up to you didn't know any better. This might have been the first time you've ever had the ability to purchase something like this ever in your entire 30-year career, versus like you did this on purpose. Now, if we'd have went through that again, if we'd have hired those people and went through that process again, and it kind of happened again with a different group of people, I would probably have very bad feelings about a certain person. But I don't want to live my life that way where I just hate everybody that happens to do me wrong. I mean, I don't even know that I'd say it that way, but I think that's a terrible way to live. And so I'm gonna give people the benefit of the doubt the first time.
That sounds very healthy and very mature as well.
Also, $5 million later.
And poorer.
Poorer, yeah. Healthier and poorer.
Exactly. It's yeah, I sympathize with Mary's role in this as well. Basically, she was in overhead, and to make it even more complex, in my experience, often like you have this instinct in sales and also within client work of getting things done. You have this instinct to just ask, what are all the requirements? But often the people you're talking to don't even know. Often the institution itself doesn't even know. Like,
that's right.
Who knew that like this guy all the way far away in some corner of the office defined some obscure protocol for or updated some obscure protocol.
Communication gets exponentially more complicated the larger you get, right? And so if it's just two people, there's one line, and if there's three people, or if there's three people, there's a lot more lines there, right? There's three, and so it's exponential how much more complicated that gets the larger organizations get, and people can't know everything, right? They can't know everything, and so I would say the biggest lesson here is know your client, know them well, understand where those traps are, and you may need to know it better than they do, right? And so if you approach it that way of know them very well, or get to know them really well, then you lose well, I just didn't know. Like, just assume they don't know something. Just assume they don't know anything, and try to figure those things out along the way, especially for things you don't know. But that's tough, right? Like, how do you learn things you don't know if you don't know to go look for them? It really takes something like this to show you. It really takes those failures to show you, okay, those failure or a mentor, right? A mentor that's walked through this path before will be able to help you along with this. But if you don't know something the first time, like, it's going to take failure, and you're going to have to do it multiple times. And maybe it's quick and simple, and maybe it's long and complicated and very expensive. But if you keep trying, you'll get to that place, but you're going to fail.
I think all of those are great lessons. I think it's great that you interpret everything as positive learning lessons and positive experiences. You might be a better human being than I am. And these are also great observations to end it on. Any final concluding thoughts, or to share with anyone that's made it this far, or is this about it?
I think you don't know what you don't know. There's only one way to learn things, and that's either find a mentor or learn it the hard way. But I think the most important thing is don't give up, right? You don't know what the future holds, right? So what kind of came out of this was now me and, I used to work for this company, and now me and a business partner of mine own it, right? And so a lot of that was due to this long drawn out process where we wasted a lot of money.
So I didn't realize you now own the drone company you used to work for.
Yeah. So you don't know what's going to happen in the future. So don't give up.
That's great. And your company is definitely not spending 2 years waiting for a government contract. Let's go fly some illegal Chinese drones instead.
Yeah, we should just sell those instead.
Brandon, it was great talking, great story, and I'm happy you're not giving up. And to everyone who's watched it this far, I hope you learned a bunch of great lessons and a bunch of new lessons that hadn't come out in previous episodes, and enjoyed it as much as we did. Thank you for tuning in.